One of the hardest parts of dementia caregiving is grieving someone while they're still alive. And that sentence alone can almost feel contradictory because most of us were taught that grief comes after a loss, after a funeral, or after something ends. But as a caregiver, you know that dementia doesn't follow a timeline. In dementia care, grief often begins long before anything is final. And that's where I find that caregivers start to feel so unsteady. Let's talk about what's actually happening. Anticipatory grief isn't dramatic. It doesn't usually show up in one big moment or in one certain situation. It shows up in tiny little fragments. And these fragments can look like a story that's being told by your person and it's incorrect again. It can also be when you look at your person and you realize they're looking back at you and yet they still don't recognize you. And it can show up when you're making those life decisions and you realize you're making them alone. It's not this catastrophic moment, but it's certainly a meaningful shift. And because that shift is gradual, it's oftentimes hard to explain because there's no clear before and after. There's just this growing awareness that the relationship now feels different. And that's anticipatory grief. It's the ongoing response to an emotional loss. And here's the part that I feel most caregivers miss. You can love someone so deeply and still grieve who they used to be because love and grief can exist at the same spot at the exact same time. And if you're feeling that way, it can be really super confusing. But I want you to know it's normal and it makes you human to have that emotional response. So let's talk about why this feeling feels so shaky and maybe even a little bit destabilizing. It's because the medical system prepares you for the logistics. They'll talk about the disease non-specifically and call it dementia. They'll talk about medications or safety or give you a bunch of appointments. But what it doesn't do is prepare you for the emotional relationship changes. It doesn't explain that love and loss can overlap for so many years. And so when this grief shows up, I bet you're thinking to yourself, am I just being negative? Am I giving up on my person when I shouldn't be? Or shouldn't I just be grateful that they're still alive? Or I'm not as bad off as Susan or Bob or Jenny. And those things are all very normal because grief doesn't require finality. It only requires love. And in dementia caregiving, love and loss are happening at the exact same time. But that overlap can create tension in your nervous system because you're caring for your loved one, you're advocating for them, and you're loving them. And at the same time that all of that is happening, you're losing little tiny pieces of them every single day. And that's why grief can feel so lonely because it doesn't announce itself. And there's no public acknowledgement, no clear moment where people say to you, of course, this is so hard. So what happens is you internalize it and you assume that there's something wrong with you. Let me assure you, there's nothing wrong with you. This pain isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you're paying attention and that you're noticing these changes, whether they're subtle or they're dramatic. You're noticing it and you're responding to the loss honestly. And when you do that, that's psychologically healthy for you as a caregiver. And here's where this becomes important. If you don't name anticipatory grief, it can turn into resentment, emotional exhaustion, numbness, or quiet detachment from your person. And not because you don't care, but because unacknowledged grief has nowhere to go. And you're left holding on to those emotions, with no place to put them or no place to verbalize it or ask, is this normal? And if you don't understand what you're feeling and you're trying to suppress it, and suppressed grief doesn't disappear, it becomes hard. It makes you hard. And just because you're naming it, it doesn't make it heavier or harder to handle because now it has a name. It actually stabilizes it because clarity reduces your internal conflict. And when you can say, this is grief, I'm holding grief right now, this makes sense, your nervous system softens. Your cortisol levels come down. Your thinking begins to rationalize again. And suddenly, that steadiness, it returns back to the day-to-day activities. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with you for grieving what's already changing. It just means you love your person so deeply. And this is exactly why the Careshift exists. Because, as you know, the dementia care system wasn't built to support families emotionally. It was built to manage the medical decline. The Careshift is different. Inside of the Careshift, we don't rush to fix feelings. We don't minimize your grief, and we don't pretend that love and loss aren't happening at the same time. Inside of the Careshift, we name what's real. We answer those pressing questions that just can't wait for your next appointment. And we build steadiness before solutions. And we give caregivers a language for what they're carrying so that they can stop assuming that they're the ones that are doing something wrong. We're giving caregivers a language that helps them navigate the system that doesn't support them. And when caregivers start to get the language that they can use inside of that system that wasn't built for them, it's eventually going to cause that system to change. Our first session is in 2 weeks, and founding members can join for $17 a month. And it's less than a copay, no waiting room, and you get answers to your questions that just can't wait for next month. If this conversation felt relieving, and if you felt seen, understood, even if it was just for a moment, that's the kind of space and momentum that we're building inside of the Careshift. I'd love to see you at our first session, where we're changing dementia care one caregiver at a time. And until next week, I'll be here sharing with you while you're caring for them. Take care.